Example 4. Simplify this expression given here. So first, I notice that I have a division here, which it kind of is like a reciprocal because I have a division with a 1. That's a reciprocal, and so we're going to check out reciprocal identities. And you see how this one has a squared? The identities that have to deal with squareds were the Pythagorean. So these happen to both be on our sheet. So reciprocal, you can see that 1 over cosine is equal to secant. And so 1 over cosine, this part right here, that is equal to secant x. That is using a reciprocal identity. That's a reciprocal identity. And over here, we have 1 minus sine squared x. Now let's go to the Pythagorean identities, because that's where the squareds are. And notice that's not a squared. That's just 2 theta. So I'm going to counteract the difference. There is a sine squared over here. I'm not worried about that for right now. Let's look at Pythagorean. That's what we know 90% of the time, maybe even greater. If you have a squared with a theta, you're going to go here. Here's one that has a sine squared and the 1. I'm going to use this identity. So the identity says that sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. This is 1 minus sine squared. So let's think algebraically. If I were to subtract sine squared here from both sides, I would get that cosine squared theta equals 1 minus sine squared theta. So what that means is right here, I could substitute and say all this is equal to cosine squared. And since they're using x here, I'll use an x. So I'm going to just change from theta to x over here. This. Now, right now, if you're watching this currently where we're located, like in the right timing, you might be confused on how I can simplify this. Now, if you're rewatching this towards the end of the 6 weeks, this will be a lot easier for you. Secant squared is the same thing as 1 over cosine, so this can actually be simplified. I know that it doesn't make sense that why'd I change this to secant if I want to go back, but at the start we didn't know that. We just knew that 1 over cosine was secant squared, so we adjusted it. And I forgot to write over here, this was the Pythagorean identity. So that's how we got from there to there. Now, I'm going to go right back using reciprocal one more time, and I'm going to say this. So I'm going to take it right back and say this is 1 over cosine x times, this would not change. This is still cosine squared x. And now when I look at it this way, I can say, oh, one of these cosines that's dividing will multiply or cancel with one of these that's multiplying. Remember, cosine squared just means cosine times cosine. So one of those would cancel, and now I'm left with 1 times cosine, which is simply cosine of x. That's my answer here. Now I have one for you to try.